Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on in-space servicing, assembly, and manufacturing. My name is Jack Kuhr, and I'm the research director at Payload. My panelists today include Clare Martin from Astroscale, Todd Harrison from AEI, and Kelli Ogborn from Space Foundation. We have a Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. We love to make these webinars as interactive as possible. So if you guys have a question, please just plop them in. We'll keep those anonymous, and we'll certainly at least try to get to all of them, and we'll definitely prioritize audience questions whenever they come up over ours. But yeah, so with that, I want to have you guys, the three of you guys, introduce yourselves. Maybe Kelli, would love to get your intro background and a little bit about your organization.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jack. It's nice to be with you all today. As he mentioned, my name is Kelli Ogborn. I am with the Space Foundation. For those of you who do not know the Space Foundation, we're a 41-year-old nonprofit based in Colorado Springs. I'm in the Washington, D.C. office. And really what we do is we help advance the global space ecosystem, everything from elementary to emeritus. Most people know us by our annual Space Symposium, which is happening next week in Colorado Springs. I hope to see a lot of you there. What I do at the organization, I'm the vice president of space commerce and entrepreneurship. I run a department called Space Commerce Institute, which is really focused on new space growth. So we look at new markets, new technologies, new verticals, and really help companies and emerging countries create scalable and sustainable business models. And so the ISAM portfolio is very much one that is critical to the growth of space. And so I'm happy to be part of this discussion. Thank you.
Cool. Todd?
Yeah, I'm Todd Harrison. I'm a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, where my research focuses on space policy, space security, and the overall U.S. defense budget. AEI, if you're not familiar with us, we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank in D.C., focusing on lots of different areas. I'm the main space guy at AEI. Prior to coming to this think tank, I've worked at several other think tanks in DC, including the Center for Strategic and International Studies, where I founded the Aerospace Security Project there, which my colleagues still doing a great job running that program. And I have, throughout my career, worked at times in industry, in the space industry in particular, and previously served in the United States Air Force.
Great. And Claire?
Thanks, Jack. I'm Clare Martin. I'm the Executive Vice President of Astroscale in the US. We are a Denver-based company, and we will be at Space Symposium, Kelli. You can see us there. We focus on delivering on-orbit servicing solutions for national security, civil space, and commercial operators. Really, we're focused on bringing that logistics chain into orbit, the logistics that we all are very used to having on Earth, for moving and maintenance and sustainment, and actually taking that into orbit to help build that circular space economy.
Cool. Awesome. Well, we're going to talk a lot about ISAM today and in-space logistics, but I think the topic on everyone's mind is what's going on with the new administration. What are people hearing just in general on space priorities? We can get to specifically in space logistics, but maybe Todd, I'll toss this one to you first. How would you characterize Trump's priorities within, let's call it within the DoD specifically, and the Space Force?
Yeah, I think that it's disruptive would be the one word I would use to describe it. It is a big change from previous priorities. We used to say that if you look at the strategic priorities in the national defense strategy from one administration to another, you see a lot more continuity than change. And that was even true from Obama to Trump 1 and Trump to Biden. It does not appear to be true this time, that we are seeing a real step change in national defense strategy. And that's being embodied in several ways, one of which is the focus is overwhelmingly on homeland defense. And we are seeing the administration go through an exercise right now to try to defund things within the Department of Defense that they deem are lower priority, so that they can fund these new programs and activities that are related to their priorities, mainly Golden Dome. And big parts of Golden Dome, of course, are going to be in space and depend upon space. So we're seeing a lot of change right now with this new administration. And I mean, you got to stay, pretty close on the news, to keep track of all the things going on.
Yeah. It's like on one hand, you can appreciate fresh ideas that are injected into policy. On the other, it's like we have, particularly with space, these programs can take years and decades of R&D, and then a shift can also mean another years and decade of R&D in a different direction. But Kelli, I wanted to get your opinion on what you're seeing, what you're hearing, how it's going to impact space.
Absolutely. And I know Todd approached it from the policy aspect, and sort of writ large national defense, where I generally sit on the commercial side and really looking at commercial growth. I think that, most folks, as Todd mentioned, are very closely watching the news to just see how things are evolving. However, I, on the commercial side, have seen optimism, especially because during Trump 1, and particularly now, seems to be very bullish on commercial space and really trying to bring new capabilities to light and look at regulatory frameworks that might be antiquated and that might stifle innovation for how we need to grow. And so from my perspective, I think that people are realizing there could be a lot more opportunity to run fast and try to integrate into the ecosystem. What that is going to look like, I think that framework is still evolving because we're still putting, some of the key space players in place. But that's what I'm seeing on the commercial side.
Yeah, makes sense. And then Claire, the $1 million question is, how is this all going to impact ISAM, or does it impact in space logistics? We still don't know a lot, but what are you hearing on the ground, and what's your opinion on all this?
Yeah, well, I will definitely agree with watching the news every morning just to keep up with everything that's going on. I think some of the changes that Kelli referred to in terms of the policy and regulation aspects could be very positive for ISAM. ISAM obviously is a relatively new field in the space policy arena with the regulation, and we work very hard to make sure people are aware of the challenges and some of the changes that are needed. I think Todd, you made a very interesting point though when talking about something like Golden Dome being a strategy, not just a program, right? So, and if we take a step back and look at things in the longer term like that it is a strategy, and in order to really build that capability and make sure that it's future proofed and it's there for the long term, it's actually a very positive thing to build logistics in from the beginning. Because if you build it in from the beginning, you ultimately will end up being much more resilient. You will save yourselves time and money over a longer term. So by looking at things with a more strategic lens rather than just, as you mentioned, Jack, programs of R&D, then I think that can be a very powerful tool.
Yeah, I was watching this morning hearing House Space Subcommittee hearing on CLIPS, and there were a number of questions posed to some of these lunar lander CEOs about cost overruns, and the answer that wasn't given is that, like, yeah, there was some marginal cost overruns with these like pure commercial plays, but like to land a lander on the moon for just $100 million in and of itself is a huge cost savings compared to what NASA has done. And yeah, I think it is important, if you have a strategy that revolves around the commercial sector, you'll have cost overruns here and there, but overall you can build something much more robust with the funding that is allocated.
Yeah, I think you can exploit a little bit the commercial sector here, especially the smaller companies. Like I'm sure you work with Kelli as well. That we're we could be a little more agile and responsive in some senses, and work much more closely with the customer in terms of trying to understand their need beyond just their requirement. And that can be a very powerful tool in moving and delivering quicker and more cost effectively.
And to pick up on something there, that Jack was talking around, this is, when you talk about ISAM, in-space logistics, servicing of satellites, this is really a new and emerging mission area for the U.S. military. And it's an area that is being led by commercial, right? And so commercial business models and commercial practices are going to be the default approach here. And I think that, when you start looking at commercial business models, it puts much more of the risk on the companies than on the government.
Yes.
And sometimes the government isn't used to that, right? And, I've seen this a lot outside of space, like with Boeing and their aerial refueling tanker. It was a fixed price contract. They had huge cost overruns, and the Air Force complained vigorously about it as if they were paying for the cost overrun, and they were not. It didn't cost them more. And so the government customers got to get adjusted to this new business model where, hey, the risk is on the commercial sector. And if you're worried they're not going to provide something on time, have multiple contractors, pay them based on performance, based on effects delivered in space, and let them worry about cost overruns.
I think that point is so critical to bring in. And Todd, I'm so glad you flagged it, primarily because we're at such an interesting juncture in this arc of commercial space, or even just space growth, when you're looking at in space, space for Earth, kind of all of it. Because really in the past 60 years, we've gone through this metamorphosis of like asking questions if things are technologically viable, to now asking questions about scalability, closing business cases, and sustainability, which is truly transformative in 60 years, right? And so while we still understand that like space tech is hard, we're focused on other problems. And to Todd's point, the risk appetite of government as a stakeholder, commercial as a stakeholder, and when that arc is fully going to flip to where commercial can truly be commercial with the government not as the anchor customer, but as one, is what we're starting to see evolve. But the way that we've always engaged is still done on this legacy way of engaging. And so the business models need to adapt, but also the understanding that we have these technologies that are anchor technologies, anchor markets, have done these really transformative demos like Astroscale has done, but we need to scale to then truly close the business case, signal more confidence, right, in the ecosystem, and allow other industries to come and play.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we are in traditionally a very conservative industry, right? And we need to break that mindset a little bit. And I always like to think about it that, we shouldn't be thinking about, commercial has to wait for government to give them money in order to make progress. And neither should government wait for commercial to get there in order to buy the service. By working together, by actually really moving towards, Kelli, as you said, that commercial mindset where the government is one customer in there, and they too raise their demand signal, and they too come to the table to talk about what it is they need. That is the change that we need to keep driving towards over the next few years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Claire, I want to, because Golden Dome is going to be, or is the signals out of DC is that Golden Dome is going to be is a serious project, and in fact they might significantly cut other programs, not space related, maybe space related, but cut other programs for Golden Dome. Can you just define what Golden Dome is for folks, and also how you could see Astroscale or just ISAM, stakeholders participating in it?
Yeah, I mean, very simply, Golden Dome is a missile defense system. Very, very simply. If people have been watching the news and keeping up with everything that's happening in Israel and the Middle East, it's Iron Dome, but Golden Dome for the US. But it will have many layers, right? It is not purely a space program. It is not purely air or terrestrial. It is multi-domain. It will involve many different areas of our industry and other industries within the US. And for us in particular, we're looking at what will be required in orbit and the type of constellations that they will need and the assets that they will need in order to be able to deliver this security to the US people. And what we want to be there to do is to help maintain the resiliency of that architecture. Okay, so we don't want, we need to get out of the mindset of, we've got to build a space system, so we'll go and design it, and then we'll do some development, and we'll do some testing, and then we'll launch it, and then we'll use it, and then we'll wait and see what happens, right? We need to build the logistics in right at the very beginning of this design cycle so that we can have that logistics on orbit to help move assets around, repair them if they need it, get them out of the way if they have reached the end of their life, so that we can literally just help maintain that space architecture piece in a fully functional form. So that's where we really are focusing on, Jack, that kind of space-based constellation area.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, because it's a critical point for the protection aspects and the just making sure that the area stays sustainable and scalable, right? Like for the different architecture. I also think, though, where ISAM can be a roadmap is if I'm reading Iron Dome correctly, I think that it's a pretty aggressive timeline in order to build the system, right? Or at least to get some sort of operational capability online. And to me, that then signals that you're going to need to look at technologies that are combat proven, flight proven, and have been there, done that, flown and demoed. And one of the lessons that I think can be gleaned from ISAM is that when you look at the evolution of how engagement happens, especially in low Earth orbit, it is now integrated architecture. Like you no longer really see an ecosystem anymore of like one company, one country engaging. It is the best of breed amongst multiple companies and different capabilities. And that is a kind of, in my opinion, sort of framework for how this is going to happen, especially to Claire's point, that it is not just in space architecture, it's a whole host of engagement on various different levels.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, you know, we got to think about all of the different space-related layers of Golden Dome and all the different phases of their development and deployment. And, you know, a lot of people in the space community have very strong feelings and opinions about space-based interceptors, including me. And I've written about how I don't think that they're practical just because of the physics of it. But I think they're going to start something, right? And they're going to do some sort of a development program. And the first step in that is going to be to try to demonstrate the technology in space. And there's going to be a role for in-space servicing for those type of testing and development missions. You know, they're talking about accelerating the development of the missile warning, missile tracking layer, well, multiple layers in LEO, MEO, and GEO. We're going to need all of that because you're facing different types of threats that you can best counter in different orbits in many cases. And especially when you look out at GEO, at the satellites that we've been using there for missile warning, some of those satellites are 15, 20, years old. And how can you design a system to counter a threat for, 20 years from now? The truth is you can't, right? And so you need the ability to put platforms up there that are basically just big trucks where you can, throughout their life, swap and upgrade payloads. And that's the type of resilient architecture we need to be moving to, especially in those higher energy orbits, where we don't want to be replacing the satellites every 4 or 5 years, that we want them to be able to last, but we also need to keep up with the threats.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that it's, when all SDA gets a lot of attention, but really it's MEO and GEO play a big role here, particularly now as SDA is still, or the proliferated warfighter constellation is still being built out. But Claire, Todd brought up this idea of swapping payloads, maybe for a GEO MEO satellite. Is that something that you guys have gamed out? And how else practically would you be able to support these assets in orbit?
Yeah, I mean, I like the phrase "gamed out," Jack. Yes, I think we call it a roadmap internally, but it's same essence. So yes, we certainly look all the way forward in that logistics chain from the inspection and awareness of where we are, all the way through to ultimately being able to repair, replace, do maintenance. There's been a lot of discussion over many years in terms of being able to swap payloads, for example, and what kind of interface would enable that to be possible. And we do have some R&D internal to the Astroscale group that's looking at some elements of that. So when we talk logistics, though, we are literally talking anything you can think of with regard to logistics. Okay, so it could be an inspection to understand your nearest neighbors or what has happened to your own asset. It can be basic maneuver, get from A to B. We can refuel. We have a mission that we're working on with Space Force right now for that. Extend life. So ultimately, we will get to the recycling, the reusing, and the replacing, and this is all along the path and the roadmap that Astroscale have envisioned.
Great. Yeah, and Kelli, if you were to give the White House or Space Force some advice on how to sustain, these different supply chains and ISAM, just generally, like how do you look at it? Maybe what are some qualms you have with how it's going now, or how would you implement policy here?
It's a great question. I would honestly start, and I think this goes across the board. I think that space is massively misunderstood in terms of the markets, the capabilities, and how it integrates, because it's still very much discussed in a silo of national security, civil, commercial, when really I think what's been illuminated throughout this entire discussion is that all of them touch each other very closely, right? And the mission sets, whether it's LEO, MEO, GEO, are all combined, and something that might be a commercial maneuver might be perceived as a potential national security threat, or like a posturing from another nation state. And so I think for me, it would better understand how the different sectors interact and how capabilities touch both, and the balance of being able to advance commercial capabilities but also use them for dual use on the defense side, I think is really important. For me right now, and I think from a policy aspect, it really goes into understanding, like I mentioned before, what's going to stabilize the ecosystem and really enable other capabilities and technologies to come to the forefront. There are these anchor aspects that a lot of them in ISAM that really need to scale in order to allow other capabilities to come online and become part of the environment. And that requires getting confidence back in the market to know that it is a market, but also the understanding of what these capabilities can do for national security. So for me, it's like a better understanding aspect of really how everything builds out. Because we also talk about space either really near term, or we talk about it very esoteric and mythical and mystical, which it's not, right? There are actual real things happening that people just don't realize have a lot of impact on daily life.
Yeah, you touched on something interesting there, Kelli, as well. So we do have a habit also of thinking about space as its own little ecosystem, right? Mm-hmm. And what we need to do is make sure that we're actually breaking those barriers and thinking about space as just one tool in trying to solve problems across ecosystems. And in a way, Golden Dome is going to be a good example of that, because space is only one element that will be needed to deliver that. And by breaking out of the space is its own little ecosystem, the space is part of how we deliver wider services to Earth, to the people, then that will help, I think, as well. It will help expand that market thinking.
And Kelli, to the point you raised about how we keep dividing space into, national defense, civil, commercial, and honestly, even in national defense, we divide it between defense and intelligence. Yeah. And they are artificial buckets. And yes, in the past, it was, a decent approximation of the different lanes that people operated in. But today, the lanes are merged, and there are crossover capabilities, all over the place. I mean, the United States military and intel community completely depends on commercial launch, right? 100% dependence on commercial there. For SATCOM, some estimates have it as high as 80% of our data throughput for SATCOM goes over commercial. But then at the same time, the military itself has a hard time defining what commercial is. They struggle to even define what it is, when maybe they shouldn't worry about that so much. But then they also, when they do get a definition, they'll try to use it in a way to say, hey, we don't want to be the anchor customer or it's not commercial if we're the only or the primary customer. And it's an artificial distinction. It's fine if you're the anchor customer. It's fine if you're the primary customer, if you're getting the services that you need, right? And there's a big advantage to that, to being actually, the dominant player in the market. But when it comes to, an area like ISAM, it's this catch-22 where we can't break out of this kind of initial stage until there is a big customer. And that anchor customer is most naturally DoD right now. The Space Force should be that customer that breaks out this market so it can start to grow at scale. The Space Force clearly has needs, as does the intel community, but they're not going to share as much publicly. If they would just buy the services they need, if they would just be that customer, then I think we would see a lot more activity grow here in this sector of the space market.
That's a really good point, because it is true. I mean, you start with segment down when really it should be capability up. Because if you look at some of the stuff, especially with ISAM, like with rapid response capabilities and, enhanced resilience and all these things, I mean, they're a tremendous impact from the commercial and national security side. And it's going to be baselined by the same tech. And so I think the conversation, Todd, to your point, maybe just needs to be flipped, and to see how we advance these capabilities and then who can take advantage of them in their verticals.
Yeah, in fact, you've touched on exactly how we consider and think about the roadmap right there, Kelly. And Todd, we start from thinking about the capabilities because they run across all the different types of logistics, and then we build up from there to solutions that we can deliver.
Yeah. There's a really good question in the chat, Claire. This one's for you. This is an Astroscale question. What are the ITAR or other regulation challenges does a company like Astroscale perceive when considering the provision of future ISAM services in connection with something like Golden Dome? And then in parentheses says, given that Astroscale is in Japan, the UK, and the US, and particularly in light of the moves of the current administration.
Yeah. So what I can say with very good confidence is that Astroscale's pretty much expert in export control laws in all of the countries in which we are present. So it is, it presents a challenge, but it is not an insurmountable one. And we have exchanged information and technology between the different entities under various, the current export regimes and under the required paperwork and regulations. We're obviously watching very closely at the next round of changes that are coming to the US export control. We're pretty excited about it. It could be actually very beneficial for us in terms of easing communication between the different affiliates. And each entity in Astroscale plays a global role as well as serving the country in which they are domiciled. So we wait with bated breath to see what will come next. But as it stands right now, we understand it, we work within it, and it is possible.
Great, and that's a reminder for anyone who has any questions for the panelists, just pop them in the chat. We'll try to get to them. Can be pretty broad ranging of anything you guys are thinking about right now. But Kelli, I want to move on a little bit to just the commercial case here, the business case. Like how do we close the business case for ISAM? Generally, there's pockets of revenue here and there right now, and pockets of government contracts and some commercial contracts as well. But what's your thought on that?
Yeah, so I want to start by a comment that Claire's colleague Chris Blackerby made on a podcast that I had him on last year, and I asked him essentially like, what should we watch for as an industry or as an ecosystem that would signal that things are moving in the right direction? And he was essentially saying when like maneuvers of theirs are no longer major news stories, right? So when it becomes more commonplace and we see these missions that we're like, oh yeah, well that's just natural as an evolution. I think it goes back to that comment I made about us not asking questions about technological viability, but closing business cases and scalability and sustainability. I think to close the business case, really, it's to understand really the integrated systems of systems approach that's building out in space. And so with ISAM in particular, there are a lot of entities and companies that have already de-risked their technology because they have done these demos, right? They have proven the viability, but in order to get to a place of actually scaling, it requires a lot of capital. And I personally think that there needs to be more diversity of capital that comes to the market. We've talked about, this market movement in the future where there's not this over reliance on the government and it is commercial, but to really close the business case, it's not just venture money. We need institutional banks, we need sovereign wealth funds, we need family offices, right? Folks that have these different risk thresholds and profiles, like Todd mentioned before, that are able to see the value and the viability in these technologies, because a lot of them are really critical linchpins to prove out the infrastructure and the capabilities in space to then allow for more access and usability. Like, we already have this environmental roadmap where we do have rapid launch, right? We have more access to space, but then where are they going? What is the infrastructure actually going to do in that environment? And that's what we need to close. It's sometimes not seen as the sexy technology, but it's the necessary technology. And it's really the risk threshold and the diversity of capital, in my opinion.
Yeah. And Todd, the just on the technology, the maturity of ISAM technology, where do you see the technology at today? Maybe what are some indicators, that we have besides what Kelli mentioned about it not being in the news anymore? But what are some indicators that ISAM tech has kind of evolved to a place of doing consistent commercial operations?
Yeah, again, I think a lot is going to depend on, do you get a U.S. government anchor customer in there to make it routine, right? I don't know that we're quite at that point yet where it's routine, but the technology is there. It's been proven out on various missions. Multiple companies have conducted over the past, I'd say 10 years or so, really. So I think, especially on the military side, they're finally getting past the point of, asking, is it technologically feasible? Now it really comes down to, how are you going to integrate this into operations, right? How are you going to reconceptualize, how you will operate and maintain a satellite over its lifespan? Where are the, points in that life where you might use some of these on-orbit services, space logistics services? I think that's where we've got to get into the ConOps, right? And how they're planning on using these systems both in peacetime and in potential crisis or conflict. I think that's kind of the next big thrust. It ought to be on the U.S. government side of really thinking through, how are we going to use this? How can we leverage this to our advantage?
Yeah,
there was a Astroscale news story that came out last week that Payload covered, where Airbus ordered. It was Astroscale UK, which I guess you would be affiliated, but from a distance. Ordered 100 docking plates. Maybe you can explain the news. Airbus ordered 100 docking plates from Astroscale UK. That seems like a pretty solid indicator signal to me. But Claire, do you mind explaining?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Well, that's an example of Airbus doing exactly what Todd just described, right? They're thinking ahead as to how on-orbit servicing, how the logistics could help them in the future, and they're taking a perfect initial step and just equipping their spacecraft before they launch with a docking plate. And that docking plate would enable Astroscale services to rendezvous and dock with them later in their life to provide the services that they need. So it really is just a great example of thinking about it before launch, thinking about it during the design phase of how can logistics help us. And that really is, Todd, I completely agree with what you said. That really is a key step in changing the way people think. And then if you're thinking in that bigger picture, you're no longer trying to ask for what's the business case for refueling, right? For one particular piece of logistics. The business case then becomes much broader because it's about all of the capability that logistics can bring.
Yeah.
And it's about the mission. It's about achieving the mission
Yeah.
And that's where you kind of break that transactional, frame of reference, right? Like, oh, is it worth paying for this? I mean, when you go and, you're driving your car down the highway and the tank's running low on gas, you don't stop and think like, is it really worth filling up with gas? Well, no, I need to get to where I'm going, and I paid however many $1,000s for this car. I'm not going to leave it on the side of the highway just because it ran out of gas, right? So we've got to have that kind of broader perspective. What is the mission? What is the invested capital that's at risk here? And of course, then the business case becomes very simple.
And those docking plates is pretty easy to install and a low commitment from Airbus, right? It's just they don't even have to eventually use your services later. That's correct?
That's correct. Yeah. I mean, and we design them deliberately that way, right? To make it very low impact, very easy for people to integrate early into their thinking and into their designs.
Yeah, I think that's very smart. We have another question in the chat. I'm not sure. I'll leave this up to the three of you guys who wants to take it, but it's about SDA, SSA. The question is that, well, seeing them as a critical path and wanting to know in some ways. The audience member says in some ways ISAM is ahead. He thinks some way it's ahead of where we are with SDA and SSA. Do you believe that to be the case?
No, I actually see the inspection element of ISAM as a part of SDA and SSA. I think it can be a great contributor to a broader space domain awareness. It's something that, for those that follow Astroscale, especially on LinkedIn, you would have seen some of the inspection pictures that we have taken on orbit of a Japanese rocket body. I think that the key don't consider them as two separate things. Actually, consider how ISAM can help enable a better space domain awareness capability.
Cool. And then, just on other. We talked a lot about Golden Dome. What are some other DoD Space Force priorities that maybe we haven't discussed here yet? I mean, we haven't discussed debris. I'm not sure if there's demand signal for that from NASA or Space Force, but maybe Kelli, we'll ask you that question. What are you thinking in terms of space sustainability and the demand for deorbiting satellites?
Yeah, I think I can speak with some limited aspect. I don't follow the defense side as closely as I do the commercial side, although they're intertwined. But I think definitely for the priority, debris across the board and SSA capabilities and space traffic management capabilities are pervasive and necessary. Particularly because if you look at just on a global scale, we're launching about once every 34 hours, which is unprecedented. And so the increased demand and access to space, and it's only going to continue to be proliferated by a lot of the constellations, like the satellite LEO constellations we're putting up. It's going to get very congested very quickly. And when you add congestion to a contested environment, you get a lot of challenges. So that area in particular, I think, is a critical aspect. And then really some of the other stuff that we talked about before, but like, rapid response capabilities, and particularly I think around enhanced resilience is probably, in my opinion, another aspect, because as we talked about before, activities in space are commercial national security civil, and the commercial national security really is very close. And we are putting up architecture and infrastructure now for threats that we don't really know yet. And so the ability to respond to those and to have resiliency in our systems is something that I think we're just going to want to bake in and integrate early.
Yeah, that's there's another question about that, baking these or having these concepts and ideas working before something is launched. There's another question in the chat for Clare that's on. The question is, do you have any thought on the future of uniform tech standards for docking equipment to support and enhance ISAM? Are there any current discussions on developing uniform standards for these things?
Okay. Yeah, there are discussions ongoing within Confers, for example. AIAA are also looking at standards. I mean, down the road, when this becomes routine and when, the Astroscale Marcoms team have less to do because it doesn't make the news so much, then there needs to be set standards. Just like you go fill your car up at the gas station, and whether it's diesel or unleaded, right? But right now, I think we need to be a bit careful. We don't want to stifle innovation. We don't want to hamper the ability of different companies coming to the market with a different idea. So it's valuable. It will be more valuable longer term. But my personal view is I would like to make sure we're moving in lockstep, so that we're not in any way handcuffing ourselves from bringing ISAM to be the routine and regular thing that we need it to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is an interesting one where government involvement in setting standards can be both a blessing and a curse. And so I think you got to be very careful there. Ideally, commercial industry would start to converge around a set of standards, and then the government could just, formalize it. Worst case, what you don't want to have happen is for the government to go off on its own and set its own set of standards that are different than everyone in commercial industry. And then people have to try to transition to the government standard or support multiple standards at the same time. And so I think that's one where it really is best to let commercial industry lead, but it's incumbent on commercial industry to get together and converge sooner rather than later.
Mm-hmm.
There's a question in the chat, a little different subsector on space stations and robotic, the robotic arms or robotics on space station. Todd, maybe I'll give this one to you. But the question is, do you think there's demand for robotic construction of large space support? You know what? This isn't a space station question, but it might be. Do you think there is a demand for robotic construction of large space support structures?
Yeah, so this is something I've written about in the past, and it's everyone in the space community is familiar with how right now the trend is towards smaller, proliferated, disaggregated architectures in space. I think as the cost of launch comes down and as new capabilities like on-orbit servicing become more available, that I think that there will be a counter parallel trend to larger, more highly aggregated systems in higher orbits. Orbits that will last much longer without decaying. So yes, absolutely, I could see a future in the geo belt where you have very large structures that multiple companies hang payloads on, and they move those payloads around and take them off and rent spot to a new payload provider on an ongoing basis. But I'm talking like space station size platforms that would inhabit geo, not with people, but unmanned and robotically serviced. I think that's definitely in our future.
Great. And since I did bring up stations, Kelli, I want to ask you about it then. What's your opinion on next gen CLD, commercial LEO destination space stations? What's the market there? And how do you see it evolving and progressing? Obviously, the ISS is decommissioning in 2030, maybe even before that. And we need a human LEO presence. So how do you see that sector evolving?
Yeah, the business case piece is the golden question of it. I think that I'm excited about the prospect of them. I think that it is the next evolution. It's necessary, and particularly, as we were talking about this kind of push and pull from government-led, commercial-led, that is a perfect example of how NASA wanted to flip the model as opposed to being the funder, integrator, developer, to allowing commercial companies to develop, run, and operate their own systems, being one of many, right? So it would be a very good model to prove out that space as a service sort of trying to lead more to a very commercial customer-led ecosystem. I think that the business model piece is an interesting question, because there's obviously a lot that those bring to bear, from space-to-space applications and space-to-earth applications. The one that I think has the more near-term viability is when you look at these space stations for the utilization of zero gravity and what it can do for biopharma and advanced manufacturing and some of these other really keen research aspects, which is the model of Axiom to begin with, right? To take on a lot of the research and development and manufacturing from ISS onto their platform. And so just what it's going to open up for more industries to utilize space in ways that they've never been able to do before, I think is really important. And it's going to just be super transformative. On the space-to-space side, that really is the ISAM question, right? So when you have these this infrastructure in low Earth orbit and the other infrastructure in terms of refueling and robotic repair and sort of everything that it will bring to bear, that's sort of I think that business model, right, of that integration, I think is later down the road, but those will be major anchors for a lot of these technologies and capabilities that want to do work in space.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I mean, I think in general, you have the cost of launch for bringing humans up is just tremendous, which makes it very difficult. But there are a lot of opportunities in space, you know, computing in space, edge computing, data, that are in that space-to-space realm that provide a very interesting opportunity for in-space manufacturing, in-space servicing, and creating kind of an ecosystem up there that exists and stays up there and is serviced via up there as well.
Yeah. They'll need the logistics.
Yeah.
To be successful. Yeah.
And I want to get on to some challenges. We have about 10 minutes left. But some challenges and roadblocks. Todd, this can be a question for you, but some challenges and roadblocks, and this can be resurfacing things we've talked about earlier today, but challenges and roadblocks you see ISAM facing in the next 5-10 years.
Yeah, it's the chicken or the egg problem, right? That you hear government leaders saying, well, as soon as this commercial market is well established, we'll be a customer. And it's like, well, how's it going to get well established if you're not an early customer? So I think that we've got to get past that. We're starting to see signs now, and the government, and particularly in the Space Force, that they are ready to take that leap and move forward with some money and fund demonstrations and start really gaming out how they're going to use this capability. Yeah, I mean, the other roadblocks is like building in the on-orbit assets that are capable of servicing. I mean, some things you can retroactively service, but, like I talked before, being able to go up to a satellite, dock with it, pull out one payload, swap in a new payload, like you got to design that capability in from the beginning. And so, the sooner we can get satellite manufacturers and operators to start requiring that and building that into their designs, then the sooner some of these more advanced servicing capabilities will be possible.
Yeah, the gaming you mentioned there, Todd, that's a very powerful tool that we could use a lot more of. And I would encourage anyone who's listening who is involved in space operations to think about it. Just gaming out how you think you can use logistics and build it into your thinking early would be very helpful. But Jack, no one ever accused me of liking an easy problem. So within Astroscale, we kind of look at the three pillars. So there's a technology angle, the policy angle, and the economics. And we work very hard on all three. I'm not sure I really perceive roadblocks in any of them. The technology is actually very strong right now. We have it. It has been demonstrated on orbit. The economics, the continually working of the business cases, as Kelli talked about earlier, and how we kind of broaden our view and therefore our market and stop talking about a business case for one specific aspect of ISAM, but talk about the business case for logistics overall. And then the very positive conversations that are going on in the policy arena right now to help with being able to put something in orbit that can move around. that can do different jobs, right? Because that's the nature of ISAM, is it's not going to one place and doing one job. So I see progress in all three areas. I generally try to be a very positive person, and I don't see roadblocks. I mean, there are challenges, yes, but I think we can. There are ones that we can overcome by conversation.
Yeah, I would love to hear you game it out right now, just in terms of like, let's say your technology is there, but your technology continues to progress, and the Golden Dome progresses, and the space economy progresses, and launch gets cheaper. Let's call this 5-10 years down the road. But how do you envision a world, in 2035 with ISAM and in space logistics supporting the ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, our founder's very clear. It will be routine at that point. That is the vision. But I mean, in terms of how we would game it out, Jack, it really is. We want to sit down with the operators and understand. It's not reading a set of requirements. It's actually understanding what the mission is about, what it is trying to achieve, and then playing through the different scenarios of how logistics can or can't help, and having that very open conversation at the beginning.
Great. And Kelli, I'll ask you a similar question since we have only a couple minutes left. But what do you see the next 5-10 years look like for this sector?
I like and I share Claire's optimistic view. I think that people in the space industry like hard challenges. They like problems. So one of the bigger things in terms of not necessarily a roadblock, but what needs to happen is we need this coordination of all the voices in the bodies, like was mentioned, right? Understanding how one thing affects another, and really the understanding that where we are right now is we can no longer rely on these monolithic capabilities like operations, infrastructure. It needs to be modular, and it needs to have the mindset of how it's going to affect a systems of systems or the various ecosystems. I think in the future, I am an optimist about space commercialization. I'm very bullish on commercial space. I know we'll get there. But I think in order to get there, it's one, understanding the roadmap, understanding the players, bringing in the capital. But I really do see an environment that in 5 to 7 years, we're having a very different conversation. We will have a space station in place. We will have infrastructure and architecture. And what I think is exciting is that right now we're starting to have these more serious conversations around a cislunar economy. And I think they're going to be more mature then. We just need to prove out these capabilities to go from demo to scale.
And Todd, I'll ask you that too, but I want to put an asterisk on it and ask you if you think the future is going to be more of a question of demand, or how capable a technology is from the supply side, from the logistics side.
Yeah, I mean, I'd share the optimism of Clare and Kelli on this. From my perspective, I see ISAM and space logistics just more generally as something that's inevitable, that we will move in this direction. I think the timing is what is going to depend on, the capabilities as they're developed and demonstrated. If you can demonstrate a higher degree of capability sooner, especially if you're backward compatible with existing assets on orbit, I think that speeds things along. But then there's also the demand signal, right, which is going to be fed in part by what is the art of the possible, what has been demonstrated. So I think eventually we will get into this positive feedback loop where there's more and more demand, which is feeding more and more demonstration and development of capabilities, which then in turn feeds more demand. So I think we will eventually get there. I think the timing is the big question on, do we have more demonstrations that drive demand, or do we have more demand that drives to more demonstrations? That's what's remaining to be seen right now.
Cool.
Perhaps
Awesome.
you challenge it, Todd, to move out of demo phase. Stop thinking in terms of space as you have to do a demonstration before you have a capability. Let's just move.
Just do it.
Yeah.
There we go.
Do it.
Yeah. Well, great. That's the end of the webinar. Can everybody be reached via LinkedIn?
Yes.
Okay, that's the easiest way.
And we'll be at Symposium if you want
And
to
at
come find us there.
Symposium, yeah. So I will say, everyone in the audience, I'm going to encourage you guys to reach out to the three panelists on LinkedIn if you want, or try to connect with them at Symposium if you're going. But this has been a lot of fun. Thank you all for tuning in, and thank you for joining, the three of you, for joining us as panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cool. Thanks a lot, everyone.